this work session to order on budget workshop. I would like to say it's 1:01 p.m. and Member Pennick is in attendance, Member Davis, Member Garrick, Vice Chair Christine Kraus, and myself, Abby Sanchez, as well as our attorney, Carlene Cole-Palmer, and our clerk, Jill Moramis, as well as our superintendent, Sarita Beeman, and I'll let you go ahead and introduce them. And then I'd like to also introduce our lobbyist that's online with us, Allie Libby Schoonover. Welcome, and we're glad to see you. Thank you. I'll head over to you now, Sarita.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, board members. We are here for the first in a number of budget-related workshops and discussions as we move forward to our final budget in September. Today, we will start off with an overview of the last legislative session by Allie Libby Schoonover, our lobbyist, and then we'll go to a budget one-on-one presentation, which is something that our board asked for us to do as part of this workshop for the benefit of our public. And so Mr. Bargeron will start off there, and then we'll get into a little bit of operating, capital, and ESSER-related updates for the remainder of the session. So we'll turn it over to you, Allie, to get started.
Great. Sound check.
Perfect.
You sound good?
You're good.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's great to see your faces. I first wanted to just start with a very specific thank you to all of you for letting me do this remotely as I recover from surgery. I am back in the office and kind of allowed to drive short distances and start kind of getting back to normal, but won't be hitting the road for a few more weeks per doctor's orders. So thank you for the flexibility. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
And I'm excited to talk a little bit about what happened during this session and all of the Tallahassee Capitol craziness. And I'm going to go ahead and share my deck here. And you all can see that, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Perfect.
Excellent. So I'll just do a brief lay of the land about where we're at as we kind of are really 30 days from sine die, which is our conclusion of session. We still have a lot of moving parts, which I'll explain. But here's where we're at in the first month after the session. At the top, you'll remember we are really dominated Republican supermajority in both chambers. That has given us a lot of discernment about what issues are priorities and what issues are maybe no-goes when it comes to the Capitol activity. This session, which is 60 days, and you'll remember that is prior to the 60-day session, which is early during the election year, they have a series of interim committee weeks in the fall. And so this is the conclusion of all of that work. There were 1,900 bills filed by legislators, and only 325 passed both chambers and will be presented to the governor. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But that 325 encompasses everything from toll reduction programs to healthcare innovation, and of course, all the education bills that we were tracking. And then I'll note here the $117.4 billion total budget is kind of out there. We'll talk about that very briefly because I know your next presentation will really dig in deeper. But that budget is a state record. Again, that budget, you'll see the asterisks there. It has not yet been presented to the governor. The presentation of those 325 enrolled bills is really more of an art than a science. So the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, and the Governor's Chief of Staff will get together behind the scenes. They'll put together a packet of bills and send them over. So it is kind of, I would say, orchestrated behind the scenes, which is why you'll see there are many bills, about almost 200 bills right now that haven't even been presented to the governor quite yet. So still a little bit of action, maybe some vetoes to come. I briefly mentioned political dynamics. You know, we really shifted from those interim committee weeks and beginning of session to the governor being on the campaign trail. Some of his actions and policy and budget priorities were really dominating what was happening in the Capitol, particularly the session before in 2023. We did see a return of the governor mid-session to Tallahassee, and kind of he and his team in what we call the plaza level, if you will, the folks that are really his kitchen cabinet, kind of returned and reintegrated back into the legislative process this session after his campaign ended. I mentioned there is a Republican supermajority in the House and Senate, which obviously influences everything that happens there. And then our current presiding officers, Senate President Kathleen Passidomo from Naples and Speaker of the House Paul Renner from Palm Coast, they both were in their final year of being the presiding officer. Senate President Passidomo has 2 years left in her term. She'll stay in office and just be kind of a rank and file member. And the Speaker of the House terms out. As you all know, our leadership selections are made years and years in advance. So for next session, we're already kind of thinking about this summer what our political, as a firm, what our involvement is with, who comes next, new Speaker and new Senate President. Term limits really dictate a lot of that revolving door in the Capitol. And then down there at the bottom, we have these education policy priorities, things we want to support, things we want to defeat, things we want to tweak. But overall, education is just one piece of what goes on in the Capitol. So the Speaker's number one priority this year was social media protection for minors. I do have a very short blip on that because I know as you all work with families and students and teachers and all those cell phones, all those devices, I wanted to make you aware of what passed in House Bill 3, as well as the Senate President's top priority was healthcare transparency and innovation. That package passed as well. Both of those bills have been signed into law by the governor. I think another dynamic that I saw repeated was really some preemptions of local government, really when it comes to kind of municipalities in counties and cities. But we saw a pattern of kind of state control being more desirable than like local control in a patchwork across the state. And then, of course, we have our annual tax package. This year it was $1.5 billion, which is quite large. So we'll drill down just into the education bills, and I'll start by saying there are 31 bills on here. Each bill, I would say, a short bill is probably 20 to 30 pages. Some of these bills, I think the choice bill might be the biggest one at 110 pages. So really hard to kind of distill 31 bills into, an appropriately timed presentation. So I will go through these. I'm going to do the longest ones first. Happy to answer any questions. Also happy to take questions during or after the presentation, and then I can kind of forward all of my, answers, or if you all wanted to look at a specific line in a bill, I can flag those and send it to Jill, and then she can distribute around to the appropriate folks if that's all right. So, but there's just no way we could cover, thousands of pages of bills in today's presentation. So I will go ahead and start with 1285. Actually, this bill was signed into law today. This bill, and again, I'm only going to highlight what I think are the top really most important pieces for you all. Some of these education train bills, like I said, are 50, 60, 100 pages. This bill increases student access to the ASVAB test during normal school hours. It has some language about instructional material complaints. I know that districts have been dealing with this, also dealing with not just parent complaints, but advocacy group complaints and repeated complaints. This bill will actually allow the district to implement a process for recovering some costs for the administrative processing of excess complaints. The bill expands dual enrollment access by creating an MOU between districts and community college or state colleges on online offerings. So great new kind of expansion on some dual enrollment options. There's some tweaks to turnaround school language. And as well as any school grade change to the formula, which we know the State Board of Administration makes those changes to the school grade formula, wouldn't go into effect until the following year. It adds an additional pathway for teachers, including a classical teaching certificate. and then addresses some additional IB bonuses for teachers who have students who score a C or higher on theory of knowledge. So this is a perfect example of where we might have 5 or 6 standalone bills. By the end of session, they all get wrapped into one, and we call that a train up here in Tallahassee. So that bill signed into law today. It's actually one of the few education bills on this spreadsheet that have already been signed into law. 1361 is really about the Lastinger Center at the University of Florida. I know many of you have heard about them or worked with them in the past. The one piece that really relates to districts is there's going to be a grant program for AI programs that would either improve student outcomes or increase or decrease teacher workload. So that will be facilitated by the Lastinger Center and would be available. It also expands some of the scholarship eligibility and opportunities for the New World Scholarship and the New World's tutoring program. So really about increasing student achievement, all connected through the Lastinger Center. The next two are my favorite. These, as you all will remember, were a priority of the Senate. These two deregulation bills, 7002 and 7004, are focused on, it's a distillation of those 118 different concepts that were submitted for consideration to deregulate public schools as you all are competing in this new marketplace with universal school vouchers. So again, these bills are, 60, 70 pages each, but just flagging some of the big highlights. 7002 increases flexibility when you all publish notices, so you no longer have to use things like newspapers. You can do it through your website or other electronic means. Also streamlining parent notification. I know this has come up in a previous work session with you all, notifying parents outside of U.S. mail, which gets lost and might have students moving around as well. It repeals some annual required reports and notices. And streamlines reporting to DOE, for example, school email addresses, budget publishing, your educational plant surveys, kind of repeals or streamlines those reports. It's got some interesting transportation flexibility in there. So if districts are using the bus infraction devices, some of those funds can now be used for recruitment and retention of bus drivers. And there's some flexibility on transportation purchases. We know that equipment is expensive. And I think that was echoed very frequently to the legislature about the various transportation challenges in the economy right now. There are a few pieces in 7002 about teacher flexibility on payment for advanced degrees. There are some collective bargaining components, has some language about the assignment of a ratio of inexperienced teachers to DNF schools, and allows DOE to waive certain subject area exam fees for teachers who want to expand their opportunities in teaching. There are several great pieces in here in 7002 about capital improvement, repealing some of the portable classroom language, expands the facilities that districts can rent or lease to auxiliary facilities. There's flexibility on facility construction and requirements, and it extends the moratorium on that cost per student station ratio. So again, another train example. Happy to answer any direct questions on these, but again, really big bills, lots of good pieces in them. 7004, similarly, a train, repeals a bunch of old pilot programs, kind of cleans up statutes and requirements, makes some changes to DJJ programs. So as we work with those providers, they have changes coming down the pike, remove some reporting requirements, including for academically high-performing districts to report an annual report to the State Board of Education, clarifies some of the instructional materials processes, including allows principals to collect fees for lost or damaged items, doesn't just leave that mandated in the district's hands, and clarifies the adoption cycle for instructional materials. That's done at a state level. And then there is some supplemental help for students in VPK to grade 2 who have substantial deficiencies. So additional supports for them, some additional parent empowerment. And then last but not least, in this kind of train category, I've got the GATE bill up here, that's 7032. And that bill is really targeting what we're considering our gap students. So students who are dropping out of high school, students who are withdrawing from high school in that 16 to 21-year-old range. How do we get that core group of students back on track, either to finish an equivalency diploma or to pursue some other training, workforce skilling? There is some great money in the budget for this program, and I think it's a great way for districts to be innovative and serve or recover costs for ways that they've already been innovative with students. So I will stop there on education trains. Like I said, I started with kind of the wild, wild west first. Are there any questions on that before we kind of roll through some of these others?
Does anybody have any questions? Member Vice Chair
do
Cross?
real quickly. You spoke briefly, I think it's 7002, the moratorium for construction and student stations allocations. Can you just more broadly overview that for us?
Yes. The cost per student station ratio, I know, has been a challenge for districts, particularly as that language kind of wasn't keeping up with the changes in construction and the ways that you all have to enhance different types of facilities, and kind of was a one size fits all that didn't fit all. And so this extends that moratorium for an additional 2 years. So you would not need to include the cost per student station.
Thank you.
Anybody? Member Davis?
You spoke about the advanced degrees for teachers. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Sure. That is in 7002. It allows districts to pay teachers for advanced degrees in the salary schedule if the degree is in their area of certification. I think there's some discussion about who that applies to, but possibly all teachers, not just those hired after that date certain from some of the previous collective bargaining bills. So should be some additional flexibility for the district.
Do they have to be certified in what they're teaching?
I would think so, but I can look that up and follow up with an email.
Any other questions?
I would
you're
like
not.
to ask our board, do you have any
Oh, yes.
questions about them? No. Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to try to move pretty smoothly through these next ones because I know we could probably talk about the legislature for the entirety of your work session, but I know you've got a hefty agenda. So this school choice bill 1403, run by Chair Tomko, is really what we would consider a glitch bill, if you will, in the legislative process, cleaning up some of the issues that they saw with last year's bill. So not curtailing, remember all these Republicans, not curtailing school choice, but really clarifying some additional pieces. And largely this applies to the scholarship programs and private schools. So not particularly necessarily to the board, but it does increase transparency on spending. It has additional deadlines and mandated annual reporting and auditing. It expands the program to children of active duty military folks and kind of gives them some flexible deadlines, knowing that the military is moving folks all the time. And updates some requirements for middle grade promotion in these scholarship programs and diploma criteria. So if anyone has any questions on school choice, happy to do an offline on that, but I know that's a big old can of worms. So we'll kind of keep moving through. A couple of bills on student achievement. I won't during these slides, but RAISE is a new tutoring program. It includes that districts can provide, it includes so this would be high school students tutoring younger elementary level students. The grant program is available and it includes a stipend for students who'd like to participate. The Seal of Fine Arts is exactly what it sounds like, provides new requirements for a Seal of Fine Arts on a diploma. And then 537 is a new pilot program about kind of music therapy and increasing student achievement. Over there on the right, you've got operations. Starting at the top there, because I think there have been some interesting questions about this, 865 is youth athletic activities, and it requires that any coach for a district that has a valid coaching certification mandates CPR training, first aid, and AED training. Volunteer coaches are explicitly exempted from this. This bill is effective July 1. So kind of coming up might be a good summer project for any of your coaches who need to brush up on training. 883 is about basically inhalers and has some permissive language. If schools or districts would like to have the short-acting broncholator inhalers on property. This would be outside of students who would already have a prescription and inhaler in the nurse's office. 958, I included there on operations. This really isn't about school district employees. It's about local government employees, but it does allow school districts and tax collectors to come together and administer driving road tests on school grounds. It gives some permissive language if that's something the district was interested in entering into with the local tax collector. On the next row, we'll go into school safety, and the top really is about those transportation bus infraction detectors. And again, kind of clarifies some of the language, a glitch bill from last year, and then allows the spending of cost of operations, or you can spend those fees on student transportation initiatives, including bus driver recruitment and retention. 1473, this is the kind of massive school safety package. Seems like we get one every couple of years. So I will say this, there's some general pieces in there, like expanding communication from the superintendent to the state college. If there's a student in a dual enrollment program who's committed certain offenses on the high school campus, letting the state college know as well, just kind of increasing communication. Clarifies school records for things like emergency drills, and requires the creation of a progressive discipline policy for school personnel who violate safety protocols. And then there's two different pieces. I know there have been a lot of questions about really some of the physical security aspects of the school safety bill. So I'd like to first talk about gates, and then let's talk about classrooms. And again, I know this bill's a big meaty one, so happy to forward any language after the call. Relating to gates for perimeter and door safety, the bill is very specific about all gates or other access points that restrict ingress or egress from a campus shall remain closed and locked when students are on campus. A gate or other access point may not be open or unlocked, regardless of school hours, unless, and so it gives you some exemptions there. So if it's attended or actively staffed by a person, so that might be, your entry in the school morning might be staffed by a police officer or school guardian. There is maybe use in shared agreement, right? So if you have two schools that are kind of co-located, or you might have a 9th grade campus on the high school campus, there might be some shared agreement space, and it may make sense for that gate to be open, and that is permissible in between those two pieces of property. Or if your school safety specialist has documented in that safe assessment tool with the department why that gate is open, why there should be an exemption. Maybe it leads to a critical piece of infrastructure or other important things. So there are several different ways that a district can make exemptions to some of those gate requirements if needed. I had gotten some questions about this bill and the gate language specifically. I asked House staff, you'll see this as a House bill, and I said, what is the thinking? How strict were you guys trying to be? And they really said, we're trying to make a policy that applies to everybody in the state, knowing that every campus is so diverse, even in just one district. So they kind of understand that there may be concerns or issues with this, and they were happy to answer those and kind of share that feedback as well. And then the other piece besides gates is classroom and instructional space safety. And this is really emphasizing that classroom and instructional spaces should be locked to prevent students from kind of entering and exiting on their own, except between obviously natural breaks like a class period change. And the bill also requires, I know many of you had asked about this as well, school classrooms and other instructional spaces have clear markings on safety areas that would be the most secure or available for students to shelter in place during an emergency. So kind of a lot of changes in the school safety space. Again, if there's a question, I'm happy to send over the kind of direct reference to that section of the bill because it is a big one.
Anyone
So I
have
will
any
kind of
questions?
pause there. Yeah, happy to pause there and take any questions.
Member Garrick? Do you have a question? Or Member Davis? Member Davis? Nobody? No questions? Anybody? None so far. I know we talked about some of these last week, but I did. But since we don't, you're more than welcome to continue on. Thank you.
Great. Next, I will kind of cover briefly, because these are pretty short and sweet, some of the content changes and instructional material changes. First, there is the anti-Semitism bill that's got a definition for anti-Semitism and some requirements for identifying acts of anti-Semitism anywhere in the state. This is, not only directed at schools, but would be directed by law enforcement and other entities as well. There is a new observance of November as Veterans Appreciation Month. There is also some veterans education programs. So this 1329 goes into the statute where it talks about required instruction and mentions Veterans Day and Memorial Day. You'll see on there school volunteer chaplains. This was a hotly debated issue in the Capitol. So this provides a pathway for districts to approve volunteer chaplains who might want to come onto the campus and serve in a volunteer capacity. Also provides avenues for parental consent as well. 1264 is about the history of communism. It requires the DOE to do some new content creation and requirements. And it creates this new Institute of Freedom Board kind of in the battle against, communism spreading in the state. Last on that list is patriotic organizations, another hotly debated bill in the Capitol this year. This bill defines very specific patriotic organizations. I can send that list along. It's, things like the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the Boys and Girls Club. It allows them to either present in schools, let's say at an assembly, or have displays in the school, maybe a bulletin board or some type of display. It does require notice and parental consent in there as well. On the CTE front, I know this is an area that Seminole County has really shined in. And additionally, you've shined so brightly that folks like Dr. Gard Harold get called up to Tallahassee to come brag about the good work you're doing in front of the House Committee. So bravo, keep it up. The first bill is pretty short. 917 is about the state creating basically a heat map of what CTE opportunities are out there. I think this map, which won't be done for a little while, they've got to procure that map, but I think it will again highlight Seminole's strength in this area. It provides some flexibility on the career fairs that districts are supposed to have, can be a little bit broader, like career networking doesn't have to be explicitly career fair. So some good flexibility for districts. And has some exemptions for private school students for participation in CTE programs in the post-secondary space, private or homeschool students. 1688 is really the bigger CTE bill for you all. It expands access and the marketing and promotion of opportunities in CTE programs, requires DOE to collect some additional data on both student enrollment and achievement in CTE programs. It also requires in the next 3 years for districts to create middle school pathways for students to go into the CTE program. Again, you all can't possibly shine brighter, but then you do in CTE, and it always impresses the legislature, and you're serving students beautifully. So keep up the CTE great work. Over there in the educator box, 1291 is pretty short. It is really directed at educator preparation programs, and it prohibits some content in those, such as biased content in those educator prep programs. 1746 is a glitch bill. Again, those are those bills that come the second year after they've implemented it. So that's the 2023 union bill. This is the glitch bill, and it has a couple of pieces in there that would apply to you all specifically. It addresses some other unions like driver unions and police, for example, unions, but specifically to the district. It has language about signed membership authorization forms and the collection of uniform assessments and dues. So just a note in that bargaining space. I would be remiss if I didn't mention at the March State Board of Education, some of those collective bargaining issues came up with the districts that have not done their teacher salary increase allocation. So kudos to Seminole for not being one of the districts that got called in. Happy to answer any of those questions. I do think we'll see more to come in the 2025 session on some of those issues. Down there in the bottom, a little grab bag, other kind of the island of misfit toys. House Bill 3 is online protection for minors. Very briefly, this is that social media bill already signed into law. It takes effect January 1 of 2025, and it prohibits any child and for any Florida resident under 14 from using social media platforms. It allows parents for young people ages 14 to 15 to have parental consent into the use of the platform. And then, of course, 16 on can use social media platforms. It does very specifically define social media platforms. Happy to talk about that offline. It was a humongous debate and very controversial issue in the Capitol. And again, it would take effect January 1. I mentioned 1007. This is really a bill that was supported by the Attorney General on vaping. I know that vaping continues to be an issue for parents and students and educators in the classroom and in schools and discipline. This would change some of the penalties. Selling vaping products to students increases the penalties to sell vaping products. The AG will develop a list of banned vape devices. Those are banned for different reasons, like single use or where they're manufactured because they're more dangerous based on manufacturing locations. So more to come on that. That bill hasn't been presented, but I know vaping seems to continuously be an issue that is affecting all types of discipline across the classrooms. There are some changes to minor employment in House Bill 49. This would expand provisions and really line them up a little bit closer to the federal provisions for minors who have jobs, as well as give some additional flexibility, for example, to students who are in a non-traditional education space, that they could work longer hours or different later hours, particularly if they don't have to be at school the next morning. And then last but not least, in the other category, there's some new employment of individuals with disabilities, some new incentives, and promotion of CTE and workforce skilling in that space. And then last but not least, we got to talk about the budget. I mentioned there, I won't steal anybody else's thunder on the budget. It's $117 billion. I met last week with the governor's chief of staff. I said, hey, what's the timing? When are you going to present it? We're all kind of waiting with bated breath. There's not a big rush right now. They've had a lot of personnel changes in the governor's team. And so I would guess at this point, maybe we'll see some governor action in May. In that 5001, the General Appropriations Act, that is where our $1.2 million for the Cyberhawk program sits. A big thanks to Senator Broder for really being our champion, as well as Representative Placencia and the rest of the delegation. I have continued to correspond with the Office of Policy and Budget. Those are the folks that recommend vetoes to the governor to make sure that they have all the information that they needed so they hopefully won't veto our project. And a big thanks to Dr. Gard Harold, who got some letters of support from both businesses for our project, but also students. I thought that was a really nice addition to really justifying our program. And I know that when I hand delivered those, that kind of caught them by surprise that we had some student letters and really showed kind of broader support and just different, trying to set us apart. And so with that, my last slide, I will not drain this slide. I think it's helpful for you all to know. My mom always asks, what does a lobbyist do when session is not in session? I do things like this, present to you, meet with the governor's chief of staff to find out things like budget, meet with the governor's Office of Policy and Budget staff to talk about not vetoing our project. monitoring the State Board of Education meetings, which are listed on here. And then, of course, we do a lot of political activity and relationship building here at our firm in the summer. And then our legislature will return on November 19th to get sworn in, newly elected folks. And then we will be off to the races in interim committee meetings headed into the 2025 session. So between now and then, I know I will see all of you at the work session in July to talk about what 2025 looks like.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of information and really well presented. And Dr. Shongard Harold, thank you for everything you've done with CTE and everything with that. I'm going to open up the floor for any questions, but I have one quick question about House Bill 13. And my understanding that is that the money went into reserve. What's going on with that?
House Bill 13 is a bill that addressed some of the minimum base salary requirements. That bill, I double checked on it after we chatted, and I apologize, I forgot to bring that up.
That's okay.
That bill was never heard. So House Bill 13 died before it was even heard in any committee. So I'm not sure, maybe we can track down some of that information after the call, but
Perfect.
was
Thank
never
you.
heard in committee, didn't pass.
Representative Smith is the one that told me that. I think I told you that. So I didn't know that it died.
Because
Okay.
there might be another bill number, but I can ask him for sure.
Perfect. Thank you. Anybody else with any questions? Anybody from you? Anybody? Superintendent Beeman?
No questions, just want to say thank you to Allie.
Yes.
Because it is because of her work that our request is still on the table and a possibility. And I know the amount of effort that it took to make that happen. So just want to thank you for all of your efforts on behalf of our students.
Yes. We all agree. You're amazing. We truly appreciate everything you do for us. And, you know, you are just a huge asset. And we adore you and love the way that you fight for us. So thank you.
Well, it's an honor to represent the district, especially as an alum of the district. And I look forward to seeing you all in person the next time we meet.
Sounds wonderful. Get some rest. Take it easy.
Thank you much.
Take care. Give your beautiful family hugs. All right, now we'll go ahead and we're ready to call our workshop. And
Yep.
Are you ready to go for that since everybody's here?
Absolutely,
Glad to-
Chair. We will move to the Budget 101 presentation, and that will be led by Mr. Bargeron. We'll turn it over to Tim.
Good afternoon.
There it
This
is.
is all right. Okay, thank you. So what we hope to accomplish with Budget 101 is for the community to have a better understanding of how the revenues come into the district, what strings are attached, what flexibility the board has to do anything to modify the revenue stream. And at the end of the presentation, hopefully we'll all have the same conclusion, and the answer is very little. So we start off with the law that describes how the millages or tax rates in Florida are adopted, and that's Section 1011.71. TRIM stands for Truth in Millage, and this law in Florida prescribes how the board will receive tentative millage rates, approve a tentative budget, run advertisements notifying taxpayers that there will be public hearings to consider the tentative millage rates and the tentative budgets, and then ultimately approve the tentative rates at a final hearing in September. And that's what will affect property owners in the community. That will drive their tax bill for the next year. I've got on the next slide, which is slide number 5, the TRIM required timeline, just to point out that it's a very tight timeline. In June, we will request the school board's approval to advertise the budget, which won't be advertised, the budget advertisement, which notifies the taxpayers of the upcoming public hearing. Because of the limited meetings that we're having in the summer, we're just going to ask for that approval in June. The actual ad will run on July 21st. But what really starts the TRIM calendar is on July 1st. The property appraiser certifies the tax roll. This is what, these are your real assessed values, all the exemptions, everything. So this is going to drive the revenue stream. Right now we have an estimated 2024 tax roll that came out of the legislative session. We have used that in the capital outlay portion of the presentation. For the general fund portion, though, we really don't do our own calculations on what revenue will be generated, because until July 19th, when DOE calculates and certifies one of our millage rates, and I hope this isn't too confusing, but a component of our tax rates, millage rates, is the required local effort. I'll go into that a little bit more. But we don't get that until July 19th. Well, the newspaper wants to have the advertisement July 17th for publishing on the 21st, for the public hearing on the 23rd. And so, we're working every minute of the day on the 21st of July to get to the newspaper, the most up-to-date information. And, we're used to it. This schedule has not changed. The calendar has not changed. But because of that, we won't have the required local effort millage rate, the biggest component of our tax rate, until July 19th. So right now we're focusing on the FEFP in total, the Florida Education Finance Program in total. I touch on that in a bit also. And within the FEFP, the legislature made some assumptions on what the required local effort will be, but since they don't know what the tax rate's going to be, none of that is official yet. Usually when we get the certified required local effort tax rate, DOE performs the second Florida Education Finance Program calculation, and that's what our budget's based on. Those are the real numbers. Those will be the tax rates that we will ask you to vote on July 23rd. So still waiting on a lot of information regarding tax rates. The plan then is to have the final budget hearing September, it says September 3rd on here. I think it's the 10th of this year. I have to look at that. Anyway, it's in September. We'll put on the notice of proposed taxes that the tax collector mails out, or is it the property appraiser? One of the agencies mails out to taxpayers. It puts the date for the final hearing on that notice. And then one final piece of the trim story is that whatever tentative millage rates are approved in July, they cannot be raised for the final hearing unless we notify every taxpayer by mail that we are planning on having a higher tax rate in September. So for all intents and purposes, the July 23rd tentative rates that are approved are set. And I've got some slides that demonstrate why they're highly unlikely to change. And I've never had them change. I've never seen them change from tentative to final. So what is a mill? It's $1 per $1,000 of taxable value. So slide 6 has the simple math. The next slide, I got the average appraised value of a single family home in the county. Last year, it was $219,523 net of homestead exemption. And so the calculation to determine the school district taxes is you multiply times 0.001 or divide by 1,000. And then you multiply times the total tax rate, which last year was 5.378. And so that's the tax bill. The next slide is for the 23-24 school year. And these are the different components of the total tax rate. And on the preceding slide, it's 5.378. Well, that is made up of, as I've mentioned many times already, the required local effort. That's the biggest chunk, 3.122. There's another required prior year adjustment, very small. And then there are two supplemental or discretionary millages that the board is authorized to levy. Those first two you're required to levy. You must levy those amounts or we cannot participate in the Florida Education Finance Program. So we lose out on a lot of state money if we don't levy those first two millage rates. The next two, the 0.748, even though it says it's supplemental, in the Florida Education Finance Program, the per student funding amount that is applied to every school district assumes that 0.748 will be levied. So, it's already built into what they're saying is the per student funding. So I don't know of any district that doesn't levy that. And then the final piece, 1.5, is a capital outlay millage, we have to run an advertisement that says, we're going to build this school, we're going to remodel this school, we're going to buy school buses, we're going to buy software, computers. We have to list in an ad everything that we're going to spend, the taxes generated from that 1.5, and then we get to the total of 5.378. So you notice I have two columns. One says maximum allowed by law, and the other says the approved rate. So we go into our budget every year with a maximum set millage rate, and we're going to get to a few slides that show what's happening to the tax rate. But to me, what this really, the story here is, we can't say, wow, we really need to give teachers a raise, or we really need to pay our bus drivers more. We can't get enough bus drivers to drive our buses. What are we going to do? You don't have the authority or the ability to raise any of these rates to accomplish any of those potential goals. So it's really, instead of, hey, let's develop the programs and the costs, and then we'll figure out what revenue we need to support that, it's flipped, and it's, here's how much money you're going to get. Now go out and bus every student that's within 2 miles of a school. Have a mental health program. Cover the increase in Florida retirement system rates. All these different things. Buy instructional materials. Buy property casualty insurance for schools. You know what's happening to those rates. So it's frustrating, but it's the way it is in Florida. And so we're forced each year to take the new revenue and figure out how to balance the budget and make the district accomplish our goals. I'm often asked, well, gosh, the tax values are going up. You guys must be rolling in money. If we had the ability to keep our tax rates the same, possibly, but the next few slides will touch on that. So slide 9 is the taxable value, nice upward slope. The next slide is, the blue line is the required local effort millage rate, which is our largest portion of our millage rate. And the orange line is all the other tax rates. So we've had a decline in our required local effort millage rate for every year going back to it looks like there was a blip in 2016, but the trend is downward. And the FEFP, it's also a combination of state and local. So there could be a drop in state funding in any one of these years. So it's year by year. It's really hard to budget more than 1 year in the general fund, because we don't know what the formula is going to provide and dictate at the end of a legislative session. Again, very little local control. The next slide is our actual tax levies, and you can see that trend line is much lower than the taxable value. And that's what I've attempted to show on slide 12. So what I did there is I adjusted the taxable value by the same factor every year. So we had close to the same starting point, and you can see the taxable value is doing this, but the revenues are doing this. That's because the millage rates are controlled by legislative action each year. If we just got to leave the required local effort at the same level it was back in 2014, over 5 mills, now we're barely over 3. And these are 23, 24, because again, we don't have 24, 25 yet. We would have benefited from the orange line up there instead of the blue line. And we can run those numbers and tell you what that is. It's a huge number. Other agencies have the ability to keep their millage, their tax rate flat, generate additional revenue, support programs, and we don't have that option. So I think this is just some general information about the FEFP again. And by the way, I'm going to use this, I use this presentation or a similar presentation with the Equity Advisory Committee. I'm going to use it Friday with the Community Ambassadors Program. And so a lot of the explanation in here is more for their benefit than yours. I'm lazy. I'm going to reuse the presentation. Panel 14, though, talks about, we were looking at the revenues, and I did mention that there are strings attached to the revenues. So, it's just not, here's your per student funding increase. I mentioned these. We did have Florida retirement system contribution rates have increased every year for years. I'll get you that information. There's a mental health categorical. Money has to come out and be spent on mental health. Safe schools, a very large component for teacher salary increases these days. So even though that money is all in that pie, it's already being carved up, and we're told how to use the funds. So it's non-discretionary. And the final component, besides the revenue per student going into the FEFP, Florida Education Finance Program, is enrollment. And when the scholarship expansion happened, in this year, 23-24, I think we're 1,700 students below the original projection. I can get you that. Also, I think I have it here. Anyway, we are seeing declining enrollment. We saw declining enrollment, especially when compared to projection. Because of that drop in 23-24, the 24-25 projection is much lower, but we're projecting a continued decrease of 175 students. So declining enrollment also results in declining revenue. There's a slide here with enrollment trends, though. Scholarships looks, the trend line is going up, but because our enrollment is the total enrollment is so high, or the traditional enrollment is so high, it kind of waters down the effect, the visual of it. But you can see our enrollment is really trending flat. Back in COVID, we had a dip, but an increase in virtual. Interesting. But the next slide looks at scholarships on its own. And that's just such a dramatic trend line. Oh, yeah. Somebody's clicking for me. Thank you. So that's scholarships, just with the scholarships. And so then I'm going to go back to revenue on the next slide. So FEFP is 87% of our revenue in the general fund. Oh, I heard the alarm.
Yeah, I was just seeing who hit the button.
Okay. Can we go back? Yep. So, the FEFP is controlled by the legislature. The FEFP on this slide, 87% of our budget. Included in that total revenue picture, though, is $52 million in interfund transfers. And that really inflates our revenue because it's money coming from capital. So it's revenue reported in another fund, but then there's an accounting transfer. And so that's reported as another financing source in the receiving fund. So it's kind of like a duplicate, but that's how we're required to account for it with DOE. If I pull the transfers out, the FEFP is 95.35% of our general fund revenue. So the importance of understanding that is 95% of our revenue in the general fund is controlled by legislative action. The remaining money, we get some Medicaid reimbursement, return on investment, after-school program fees, some preschool fees.
Does anybody have any questions on that? Because I know I do. You go ahead and you ask yours first.
If I can formulate it, we were told last November, I think, that based on projected enrollments, since we didn't know what was going to happen with the school choice and all of that, that the state was going to guarantee a portion of our projected normal enrollment. Did that happen?
You're talking about the $350 million that was set
Yes.
aside? Yeah. And I thought about asking the lobbyists that same question, but I didn't want to, come out of left field with that, because I believe there's a $250 million now annual appropriation that is set for 10 years, if I read it correctly. My understanding, though, was that if statewide, more students opted for scholarships than was in the original budget, that the $350 million would pull in
Would
and cover
offset.
those scholarships and hold us harmless instead of doing a prorated holdback. That was my understanding of it. As far as I know, it's not been accessed statewide. We didn't hit their original numbers in this year.
They're supposed to have a website you could just drop the information to them, but nobody's heard of the website.
I've not heard anything about it. I've not seen the number in any calculation. The last I heard about it was at the end of the session when we all had the same questions. What is it? How do we access it?
Mm-hmm.
Haven't heard anything.
And my other only comment is, the waterfront communities have such an advantage over us with their property values and probably lower enrollments, I would think, than our district. And our buildings are getting older. We need to figure this out somehow. Thank you for your presentation.
Yes. With the transfers and the money not following the children, how does that, like, for example, Arizona, when they started that, 2 years ago, they lost over $3 billion of tax-paying money. What do we foresee in I know that's probably, you wouldn't know what our numbers would possibly look like. Is there a way we could find out with that amount of students that we've lost? I don't expect you to answer it today, of how much we could possibly see that we've lost since let's say a student was gone and they decided to go to either homeschool, private school, wherever they decided to go, and then they come back into our system and the money doesn't follow the child. We lost the funding on it. Is there a way that we can find out yet on how much money we're looking at? I know the state is bigger picture, but I'm just county-wise, district.
No, they have in the FEFP, there's a sheet for scholarships. And I think this year was 56 million and next year it's 77. It's readily available. I just didn't bring it down this morning.
That's fine.
This afternoon. And there's a number on there for the total state too.
But then some of those kids already started back into our school system too, though. But we don't have the funding for them. Or we do, but we don't. You know what I'm saying?
If they come back
we make sure we have it.
If they come back before the survey, we're supposed to get the funding for them. I don't know what happens if the funds were already released. Because the funds
Okay.
that the private schools, the scholarships, they're being released more frequently than we get our funds. Or there are more calculations. We have an October survey, which results in a December calculation. February survey results in an April or May calculation. Last time I spoke to someone from Tallahassee that was in school choice, they said that they have 4 different calculations throughout the year for the scholarship students. So if I go to a private school and I'm there for the first count and I get a quarter of my money, if I come back into the district, they've already paid somebody some of the money. And there's no transparency on how any of that works. Good luck asking somebody what
I
happens.
can't find the answer.
I have asked at multiple finance officers' conferences. They've got DOE representatives there in the room, and they can't answer or will not answer the questions. So it's a black box. It's a multi-billion-dollar black box.
Would we have any way to track that, like for year to year, or no?
This year we get a report from the state that just says this is how much money you earned for scholarship students in Seminole County, and that's how much money we're taking. So it's like an in and an out. We don't even report students through our FTE reporting any longer. They stopped that. So we used to have some data on who's in our system for student count. We had a school that was for scholarships. They stopped that. Why
So
stop
the FTE
something?
count isn't the same the way it used to be?
For traditional and charter virtual kids, yes. Scholarships,
No.
it's a completely different process. But it's still showing up in the FEFP, so at least we have those numbers. There was talk about eliminating it from the FEFP, so then it would be even farther off the shelf. But we're having declining enrollment. How much of that is scholarship? We don't know.
Would it be advantageous to us to if in a perfect world, they offered us 4 calculations a year, or would that be just way too much work?
I've never counted kids, so
It could be done.
if we lose a lot of kids, it depends on when they happen.
It's not, yeah.
FTE is a heavy lift for schools.
Right. I'm sure.
You get the kids to show up more, maybe.
There's also, it's more complicated. It was, in the past few years, it became more complicated when the concept of recalibration was introduced. Are you familiar with that? Mm-hmm. Where one student can only be 1.0 FTE. So if I'm taking virtual classes or I'm taking a class somewhere else, the state looks at my student ID number, and so they're calculating for every student in public education their total FTE statewide. And if it's over 1, they're going back and prorating it down for every school that has that student. And so they're having to do that calculation. We'd have the October survey. We would get our next FEFP calculation in December. Now, because of recalibration, we're not getting it until late January, I think it was. It's really pushed processing of information farther out. I don't know if I emphasized what the required local effort means. That is what the legislature tells us we are required to levy in order to participate in that 87% column of funding, which is $534 million.
Eye-opening. Member Garrick?
Thank you. I know that this is difficult, but you're up here in distilling this to the common person is difficult. So I appreciate you putting it together. There's some critical information that I think would be advantageous to our community for education. I think primarily what we're working with versus compared to districts throughout the state. I know when I went to FSBA, that was really eye-opening. The first bucket, as Vice Chair Kraus talked about, was was property values. And folks that live in Seminole have always said, "Oh, we're a wealthy district." But if you look at the property values of the land itself, it's not nearly as highly valued as coastal lands.
I have that analysis. I just need to update it.
Okay.
I have it. It's dramatic.
And I think that that's important for folks to see what we're working with. I mean, I'd ask the superintendent if that's information that she would want shared as well. But I think as well as how other districts, I think it's important to talk about the sales tax and where that fits into these buckets and how that's been advantageous to us over the years.
Capital next.
Yes.
Sales taxes and capital outlay, so we're going to hit on that next.
Right.
Oh, okay. I'll be quiet then and let you get to all your points.
I wanted to say that because that's something else. This is such daily life that a lot of folks don't realize. Capital outlay, that 1.5 mil levy, that cannot be used for operational purposes. There are some exceptions built into the statute, but that money, and that's why we have to run an ad each year. Somebody can come back and look at the ad and audit what we bought or spent the money on and make sure that those two, reconcile those two. And if they're not, we can get trouble. So we segregate those funds, and we really are very vigilant in how they're spent, but they cannot benefit the general fund. So there's no way to take a millage, one of those other millages, that capital millage, and benefit the general fund.
Thank you.
From with that, my question also aligned with the general and what Vice Kraus was talking about, the land on the water. What about areas like Tallahassee that's landlocked by, for example, when I was up talking to Allie in Tallahassee, she's like, we're not going to have the issue with private schools like you all are going to have issues because we have there isn't any private schools around them except for their public schools. So they don't have that number. So some of these areas don't have that same dynamics that we have. So how can we do a comparison? I mean, that's like that's a small county compared to our county, but.
Well, no, I have every district in the state. I have their taxable value. So I can calculate the revenues that would be generated, and I have their enrollment. So I did a per capita revenue generation per district. I did it last year, and I'm not going to put out any numbers, but when I share it, it is dramatic, especially in the capital outlay, because everyone can levy 1.5 mils. And I say that you can't benefit the general fund, but there are some creative ways to expand on the exceptions. If you have close to double the revenue and capital outlay that we have, you're going to see that on some schools on a per capita basis.
One size just doesn't fit all. And it sounds like we're losing less and less control. The purpose of the FEFP, which I think was introduced in 1973, was to make sure that every student was really close in getting the same amount of funding. And, that philosophically sounds great, and it probably did work. I wasn't in the business at the time. But another huge thing I just remembered. Capital outlay funds, that 1.5 mil, can now be used to pay bus driver salaries. So you're going to see coastal districts paying their bus drivers out of capital outlay and freeing up millions of dollars in their general fund. Property-rich coastal districts. So that's a transfer that if we had excess capital funds, I would be recommending that we look at that big time. When I first started working here, I was told that a regional district really increased their bus driver salaries. My immediate thought was capital transfer. So yeah, there are ways that some districts have an advantage over others, and the only way to fix it is to do that same equalization on the required local effort to make sure that everyone gets the same money. Good luck with that.
I think it's something worth to keep on our legislative priorities. Maybe,
I agree.
Maybe not just flexibility with the FEFP, but legislature to look at the RLE and stop rolling it back because we've lost.
Right.
I know your predecessor showed me a spreadsheet where he calculated really what we had lost over the years, and that could build probably 2 new schools.
It would be very easy to show, keep the RLE straight, required local effort flat, and say we would have generated this much more. Is that what you're asking?
So can we send him up there to show, or a spreadsheet of the differences, and kind of like when Dr. Gar-Harrell did the CTE, and maybe they could see it because the legislators aren't seeing this or understanding it?
We can certainly have this as one of our priorities. Dr. Gar-Harrell was invited, so a little different dynamic, but make it part of the priorities and have it being pushed by our lobbyists so that we see if we can get some traction on it.
Talk about that later, I guess, and see.
Yes, and I was trying in the brief conversations that I've had with some of our local delegation, trying to explain this to the best of my ability, but they didn't seem to understand the disadvantage that we were at, and so I would really like it to be. I mean, this, as you know, I've said over and over and over again. I mean, this is our crop. This is our, this is our Siemens, our schools. This is our citrus. So I would really like them to be able to understand that not only do we need it for our kids today, but how vitally important this is for our future community. And if they really understand, I mean, I just feel like I just don't think that they are understanding the disadvantage that Seminole County has compared to other districts. Because if you look at the numbers, you're like, oh, well, you ask for the max and everybody has the same amount of required, the percentage that you're allowed to ask for, and yet we're still, year after year come up short compared to neighboring districts.
I agree. I don't know if there's a way that I don't know if that would open up a can of worms or not, but I know you're going places and you're presenting, but even having Catherine create a website, or not a website, but a little YouTube video of how, because it's even hard for us to understand. I mean, this is a lot for even us that have been up here to really grasp the concept of what's happening. And if I'm having difficulty understanding it, I can't even imagine how many of our constituents, the transparency of them not understanding it. And it's extremely difficult to see the decline of the money that's just disappearing. And Member Garrick said too, it's hard to explain to people because it's comparing districts or all kinds of other stuff. So I don't know what the answer to that is.
Well, I'm very grateful that you are going
gosh,
to
it's
the
amazing.
different groups. I'm grateful Commissioner Herr is listening and
Yes.
understanding. And I think that's going to be our job, is to share the information. So
I agree.
And I will absolutely include this and work with Ally so that when we have our legislative priorities
Perfect.
Workshop here in a couple of months, that we have some language that captures this discussion for you all to consider for our priorities platform for the year.
And I did mention our local delegation that, I'm sorry, did I?
No, I was
that,
looking
that
at you.
goes to Tallahassee, but I also think in meeting, and I do appreciate you being here, Commissioner Herr, I've tried to talk to our local city electeds and managers because they don't understand, why they're like, well, we've got all this extra money to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm trying to explain, yes, you do as the cities, you've benefited from this additional property value rise, but as a school district, we are still, in 2014 when it comes to our budget. So I just think that kind of education, perhaps if we could, because I know that they value our school district and know that what we bring to the community and to the values of their cities. So perhaps if we could get together, maybe
Superintendent,
maybe our voices would be a little bit louder.
I had a thought too, because we're expecting a good turnout for the state of our schools. Could
Yes.
we do a little summary with that as part of that?
I absolutely think the state of our budget is part of the state of our schools.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And the mayors and managers, they do know what's going on with because in the meetings that we have, that I just came back from, but the other elected officials and the city commissioners and all them, they may not, but the mayors and managers, they know. Are they getting it to the other people, their city commissioners, or to anybody else? Probably not.
I don't know. There was perhaps, and I hope you're right, but there was a mayor that I spoke to who had been in office for a long, long time, and that person saw things differently than I did. So I hope that I can keep this. And
Thank you
share
for
it.
preparing this.
Thank
and
you.
your
Yes,
staff.
this is awesome. Thank you so much.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Starters, with the private school scholarships and things, I thought at one point we spoke about trying to track when these kids leave and when they come back. I know in the beginning of the year, we have a set number of these are our students. We place them in classes, and that's one number. But we didn't have a system to where when they leave, we have some sort of questionnaire, or we ask them questions before they get their transcript. And I know everybody doesn't get their transcript or their records.
Is your
Yes.
okay?
And at that point, if we knew they were going to utilize the scholarship, halfway through the year or something like that, and then we track them when they come back and say, hey, where are you coming from? We want to see some records that you were in school. At that point, we know how many students are leaving and how many students are coming in, not in the beginning of the year, but throughout the year, and could actually calculate how much money we're losing because of these time constraints, how we do the calculations. So we do it twice a year. But if they're coming in right after the deadline, then we're losing the money for the second half of the school year, for example. I thought originally there was some vague direction from the state that this $350 million, somehow we were supposed to describe the discrepancies and how it's affecting us or you know, what we're losing out on because of it and kind of fight for that money. Now, I know it was all vague and all that stuff, and there was no really any directive to it, but if we can calculate and show, you know, at least some of the dollars that we're missing and that we are spending based on the rest of the budget, we can then advocate to get more of that money. Because $350 million is not really a lot when you talk about the whole state of Florida. All the 67 counties, and, you know, it's a lot of money, but it's not necessarily going to cover every district's needs. And so the sooner we figure out how we can show them the loss that it's caused, maybe we can advocate for the money.
Well, and I will let Mr. Bargeron jump in and talk to any specifics, but you're right, it was very vague, and there was throughout the year no rule or direction that provided for us to think that we would be eligible to meet a requirement to access that $350 million. And so we're still in that same place as it relates to the stabilization fund, as I understand it. Mr.
Well,
Bargeron?
you know me, just send it in, you know, say, here, we need the money for this.
Well,
I mean, redo it when they do the rules.
But another thing to consider is that when, you know, it used to be that the student had to be in the public school first. Now it's wide open to anybody. And so there's no loss to us if the student was already at this private school. And we suspect that that's the majority of the students that are now getting the scholarships. So we have, you know, very limited access to any of this data. You know, again, they took away the reporting of our Seminole County students that are in private schools getting scholarships. We used to have that data. We don't even have that. There's a payment file that's out there somewhere. I don't even know what that looks like these days.
But we'll know in the beginning of the school year how many students we have. And then there has to be a way to track when they leave and come back.
Well, if they come back, I mean, I know, I don't know what type of collection that is occurring at a school level when a student leaves. You know, when they have to transfer records, that's.
But when they come to re-enroll or enroll, not at the beginning of the year, we can certainly require that we know where they came from, whether they were a scholarship student or not. Because we have the right to know that, because now we have to apply for that money again.
That, can we even ask that?
And I want to, we get any applicable records when a kid is enrolled as to the education kind of background of that student. We are asking that. Similarly, when they leave, if they indicate on their documents the reason for the withdrawal, we have coding that we code in there. I think for us, the frustration is that there's a number of students that that have never accessed our system that account most likely for the large portion of the dollars that we're talking about, because they were able to apply and receive those scholarships without any real connection with us. But yes, we do have, we can get certain information when a student is enrolling that tells us, you know, where they're coming from. That is requested, records, that sort of thing. And then when they withdraw, we do ask for the reason and then code them appropriately based on the information that they give us.
If they reply.
If they give us that information.
If they do it and ask, you know, for the records to be sent somewhere, if they were here. Now, obviously,
Yes.
in the beginning of the school year, you have a set number of students. So here's your number of students. We can tell from years back, you know, if that number is going down, those are the students that are probably applying for the scholarship before they even come here. for the school year. But
That- but we
the
also
coming
have-
and goings we can track.
The coming and going, we can, for a large portion of the students, we can find out, yes.
And then we can find out if it passed the deadline, whether or not that money is still with the private school or with the parents for homeschool, and we don't get it.
I'm not sure that it's as simple as what you're thinking, because you're saying when they come in, if it's after, let's say, the October timeframe, and they say, well, I received a scholarship for X amount. Is that what you're suggesting?
If we can't count them in our count after, mid-year, we do it twice a year, and if we can't count them in our count at that time, by the deadline, then we know they're not going to be counted for funding.
Correct. And that's part of what we use when we're looking at our projections, and that 1,700, for example, that we say that based on the projections that we're estimating that 1,700 that didn't come probably utilized those scholarships.
Right.
But what Mr. Bargeron is saying is that the large amount of the scholarship dollars that are being attributed to Seminole County, it's based on more than that 1,700. It's based on a number of students that we never saw, because they were most likely sitting in a private school, continue to be in a private school, but this year they were able to access the dollars.
Access
So that
scholarship.
17,
And because the state's not providing that information, we can only do estimates, and we can only do what we can to show, look, this is what our school is losing. I mean, you can't just change the programs and drop all these programs because we don't have enough funding for them. And that's the effect that is going to happen, because if you don't have the funding for 100 students, but we have some sort of program, designed for 100 students, then we have to get rid of the program because we don't have enough participants, for example.
And-
That's just a minor thing.
And
but-
speaking to the same people up there is almost impossible because people have left. The
Yeah,
turnover has been
but our
really
budget
fast.
doesn't change because we have to support all the things that we've already gotten.
or we have to, each year we're looking at, do we have to cut some
Right.
things in order to be able to have a balanced budget?
And if we could at
These
least
programs.
write something up about what we do know and what we don't know, I mean, who's to say we can't submit it for money? They didn't do any rules
The
yet.
cuts are already happening, so.
Well, for the stabilization funds, there was no submission, no rules, no details for at least that pot for this school year that we were told that we would be able to access. So going forward,
Changes and say, like, this is how it affected us. Whether they're going to distribute that money next year or the following year or whatever, at least we have our information in to say, this is how it's affecting us.
I think that's absolutely part of the story of how we are impacted by some of the things that are happening via the legislation. Absolutely. That's part of the story I think that we have to ask Allie to share when we're talking about what this is as far as our priority, when we're talking about, all of those things in lobbying for Seminole County, how the impacts of legislation, all of it, are affecting our district. That's part of the story.
Superintendent, could I ask one more question?
Sure.
Don't we have to monitor, receive, and distribute the funds for the scholarship programs? No?
No.
They go directly?
Yes,
Okay.
they never,
So it's not our staff that you?
Correct.
Okay, good. At least we don't have that.
they don't, it's a completely, the Step Up program completely administers.
Okay.
And so that's another reason why we don't have some of the data
Right.
that
And it
would
being
help us.
so vague, we've already started losing allocations and spots. I know that ESE has already had to carve out some behavior interventionists, right? Am I correct, Ms. Elwood? But part of the whole picture.
part of our discussions is looking at the enrollment, the projections, and what that will mean for funding and for what we can do for our schools as far as staffing. Can you afford all of the individuals in order to have those programs based on the funding that you are projected to receive that's based on enrollment? That's part of the analysis every year.
Know how many students are participating in?
Yet they are allowed to, in some circumstances, to participate in sports programs. I'm not sure that I have a number for that, but
They can
something
also-
certainly that we can, excuse me?
Do we know that that's happening now?
What that some of the private school students are utilizing. I know that there are some non-SCPS students that participate in our sports programs, yes.
Well,
And
they
it's
can-
provided for by law. There's rules and so forth, but yes, I do, that there are some students.
And
We have
it's
to
not
fund
just
that, too.
sports, too. They can do art or PE or gifted and talented. There's all different, well, maybe not gifted and talented, because that's our special program. But if they don't have a gifted program at their school, they can come to our school. So there's
Right.
all different
How are we going
options.
to track that?
Well,
Because that's lost money too.
Even if they're homeschooled, they have that, they're tax-paying
Right.
citizens. They can get whatever they want on that. It's always been that way.
Sign up to register for playing sports. Don't they have to pay a?
Just for the school, but not
I'm not
from
aware of
us.
a fee, but I think that there are requirements that if their school provides certain, those same programs, then that would limit their ability to come in to access our program. So that's, it generally falls under the John McKay statute. And so we have a policy and rules about when private homeschool, charter school students can access the traditional public school athletic or extracurricular programs.
They don't get to play sports for free. If you sign up, like for my girls, we pay a team fee. Those kids would pay the same team fee.
Well, the same that our students pay though.
Any other
Something else
questions?
to
or-
add to our,
Member Garrick?
I did about the attrition. Well, I'm going to say attrition, but it's an assumption. We have 1,700 approximately fewer students that enrolled this year than last year, or the 1,700 fewer than were projected.
It was the projections.
Projected.
Right.
Do we have numbers of students that have withdrawn? Do we have, so if we've lost 1,700 students from what we thought we would have, are we seeing withdrawals from schools? Or, because perhaps there were, I don't know, 1,700 kindergartners that never registered, or perhaps,
A lot of
you know,
kindergartners.
we had more single people move to Central Florida than we had folks with school-aged children. Like, is there a way to even suss out how many students we typically would have had?
Yes, we can, and we track throughout the year
Okay.
enrollment as we move forward, because you all know that right after September, a lot of
Right.
folks will, I didn't realize you've been in school since August, and we see an uptick in enrollments, and so we do track throughout the year, and so yes, we can pull any withdrawals throughout this year, but know that might, they may have come back, and it will be kind of a snapshot in time. But
Gotcha.
yes, we can look at the end of this year and say how many students withdrew during 23, 24, and pull a number for you.
That'd be
Absolutely.
good to have.
Excuse me?
That would be good to have.
Well, and especially the 16 to 19-year-olds, like Ali was talking about, there might be some funding available to incentivize them to either get their GED or.
On a
Right, to
positive,
finish their education, even
Right.
if it's an alternative path. We had talked about Elevation High School doing some work with them, but there might be something additional that we as a district can do. I just wanted to make sure that I understand this in sort of layman's terms as far as the financial impact vouchers can have on the district, sort of building off of what Member Davis had said. So she was saying, well, we've got 100 fewer kids in this program, so we're going to have to get rid of the program. But the way I look at it is if you have 100 fewer students, it's 3 from an elementary school here, primary grades. It's, 4 high school kids here, and so the issue is we can't reduce. It's not as simple as taking away, okay, well, we just won't have 2 teachers, because now it's where, the difference between educating 25 students and 27 students might not be the full $1,600 or $16,000 approximately that we receive for those 2 students, but the loss of that impacts the greater bottom line. And so that's where we have to start making our tough choices, because we can't just close, we can't just say, oh, well, at, I don't know, Bear Lake, we're only going to have 3 kindergarten classes this year. That'll solve our problem.
Yeah, no, that was just a quick example.
Oh, yeah. No, I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding correctly.
The overall impact when you don't have that money, you have to start cutting somewhere. Whether it be programs, whether it be instructors, whether it be
Transportation, right.
Energy costs.
something.
Right. And I mean, you both are correct in that we have to look at things as we're moving forward and make adjustments. And I'll give you an example.
Please.
Because the 1,700 projected were not, just in one particular area of the county or one particular school. It was across all of our schools. We saw more movement as far as lower numbers in our K-1-2 across some of the elementary schools than we did for high schools. And so we had to adjust, and that conversation happens particularly early on in the school year. So after, day 10, when we're looking at enrollment, are there areas at any particular school where we can adjust as far as allocations while still being able to meet class size and those sorts of requirements because of the way the students actually enrolled in any particular school. So it's a kind of look by look across our schools at a number of different points to try and adapt as best we can to what we're actually seeing as far as students showing up in the schools every year. And that happens every
Program
year.
that does the numbers.
Excuse me?
We have the program that does the numbers for each classes, like when they want to transfer and things.
Well, we have Miss Medvey.
program.
Dr. Medvey is over our staffing and enrollment, and she is bringing every week. We're meeting before school starts and then daily after the beginning of school so that we can adjust to what we're seeing. Right now, there's a dashboard already that she's looking at. Who's enrolling in kindergarten and where, as we are pushing out the projections and so forth for allocations for the different schools. So it's not a, well, we are down 1,700, kiddos, so we're going to make these cuts across all of the schools. There is an attempt to look and see where we can have the least impact on our staffing, but also meet the requirements for class size and make our budget as we are moving forward.
Correct. Unique and challenging programs.
Correct.
Member Pennick?
I read an article a couple months ago about the impact of vouchers. It might have been at the end of last session or beginning of this year. I think an important data point to include in your analysis is how many private schools are in each county. That article did have that component, and Seminole County had, they were purporting that Seminole County was going to take the largest hit because we have the most private schools in our county. We have upwards of 85 or more. And that's, when I have shared that statistic with other community members, they were shocked at how many private schools we have. And I think, for our size, that's a large amount of private schools that are drawing from the voucher program and that are drawing from our students. And so I think that would be a really good data point. I know that some of the source information came from Step Up, so I think Step Up has private school numbers per county, so that should be an easy data point to get. But I think that's part of the story.
I agree. I think also the proximity to Seminole County for residents of Seminole County to some of the Orange County, Volusia private schools is also a part of that story.
That's why I was
as
talking
well.
about the
If here, they can
landlocked.
go to private,
Yeah.
they can get our money
Right.
and go to Orange County.
It's based on residency. Yeah.
And that's why when I before was explaining how Tallahassee's different than it is here. We have the opportunity for all those kids to go on. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Any other questions or that?
Keep going?
Oh, yep.
We're to the operating budget update.
Yeah, these will be real quick. You were doing such a good job. Please. Go forward. So the next two slides, and for the crowd's benefit, the board approves budget amendments at every board meeting. Every fund has budget amendments approved at every board meeting. So it's a very fluid document. But what I showed on the next two slides, this was the fund balance. So also for the crowd's benefit, fund balance is our savings account, equity, whatever term you want to use. But it's the amount in the bank account at the beginning of the year. You add revenues, you subtract expenditures, and ending fund balance is what you have at year end. So you want it to stay close to what it was at the beginning of the year. If it is dropping too much, that would raise concerns about sustainability. But I wanted to point some things out that make us a little bit different from that simple formula. So this was the ending fund balance that was approved at the final hearing in September. Final hearing, but it's the first pass at the budget. You can see the June 30, 2023 year end had different tiers, different lines within the budget. You've got non-spendable, which is mainly inventory. Restricted, those are going to be state grants and things that we have to carry forward. Assigned programs, very similar to restricted. Committed is something that the board has to take action on, so we didn't have any of those. These other two are state mandates. And anything that's left in our savings account is called unassigned, and that's the money that you can pretty much use for whatever you'd like. There are thresholds on how low we can go. We're well above those. So the fund balance in September, projected June 30, 2020. The totals are on the bottom line. It's going from 98 to 52.5 million. But if you look in the 6/30/23 column, over $27 million of that fund balance is in the restricted. So we really want to focus on unassigned fund balance when we're doing that drawdown exercise. Because what we do is we rebudgeted that $9,890,931 restricted. That's money that we got in 22-23. We've already booked the revenue. We didn't spend all the money, so it's sitting in that line item. So we're planning on spending it completely in 23-24. So we expect to have zero remaining June 30, 24. So that is not concerning because that's drawing down the restricted. And I just really I wanted to point that out because I have a lot of people that look at that $45 million figure and they say, wow, you're drawing down your fund balance a lot. We had conversations about Fitch Rating Agency last week. Their people don't understand this because they're asking me about the drawdown being so large. And I said, half of it's restricted and assigned. Come on, guys. Anyway, the reason I wanted to share this was to really start focusing on this when we have fund balance discussions, but also to show you on the next slide that the unassigned drawdown used to be 17 million. If you go back, Jill, 17. Now the drawdown is only 14. So we've had improvement in our budget as it relates to the unassigned appropriations and revenues. And we're highly confident that we will end up in much better shape than what these are representing. And now that we're in the final quarter, we're going to start really closing out some budget balances, places where we know we're not going to spend the funds at year end, and that should reduce the unassigned budget appropriations, which will allow fund balance to increase. So digging a little deeper dive into what fund balance components really are, and sharing that we've improved since the original budget was adopted. That was the purpose of those two slides. And if there aren't any questions on that, we're to capital outlay.
We love good news. Thank you. More of that, please.
Capital outlay.
Thank you.
Dr. Mullins and I we worked together on this. This is a joint document, so you may hear from both of us on this one.
You guys are awesome.
So I guess I'll start out with my ownership pieces. So, and you guys have seen this document. It's the long-range plan. One was sent to DOE recently, and somebody identified, hey, property casualty looks pretty low, and it was. But I also want to remind you that we've inherited this document, so now it's ours. So since the last time you've seen this, a couple of things have changed. We got after the legislative session ended, the legislature's gross taxable value estimate. So I updated line 3, the 1.5 millage capital outlay, and compared to the last version over the 5-year period, we're now $41 million up because of taxable value increases. That's good news for the long range plan. In case you're wondering, I've highlighted a couple of things that orangish highlight. That represents like a grant fund in capital outlay. We have very few of those, but the money has to be spent on a specific purpose. And so you can see that $1,711,000 on line 1 is the same amount on line 22. UNDS is a very specific capital revenue stream. We have to submit a project priority list to identify what we're going to spend it on. We're going to use that money for roofing. But so anyway, those will always equal. That's why I highlighted them, similar to the charter school capital outlay flow through. Now that's the money that comes from the state that flows through to the charters. That's not their portion of our money that now goes up to 50% of what they should be getting. Remember that rule change? They're getting our local capital or our local tax revenue stream, a portion of it now, 25, 50, 75, 100%. So it's over 4 years. That is, line 19, right above it. 20 is the state flow through. The line above it is their share. You can see on line 17, we have increased property casualty. Got that information from Dr. Singletary. The reason I have row 10 highlighted in yellow is because if you go back to page 26, you'll see that the ending fund balance in 24-25 carries up to be the beginning fund balance in 25-26. Just pointing that out. That's how the math works. It's a good thing. And want to touch on any of the project changes, or right. Yeah, thanks. Another big change is on line 6, we're only budgeting for half of a year of sales tax collections in case it expires in December. And we've got some new projects that we've added. You want to do it? You got it? Have at it.
So a couple other changes, or since you've seen the document last, if you look at line 48 and line 69, that's more of just, this is our document, so we can add project lines as we need to for our planning needs. And that's really more for our planning perspective to raise our awareness and commitment to moving from repair at failure to a renewal plan according to the life of equipment. So I know the board saw in a previous presentation by my predecessor that we currently have assessed over $100 million of HVAC equipment at or beyond its usable life, right? And our current budget this year is about $14 million for HVAC replacement, which when you're tackling a $100 million challenge, that's a bit of a drop in the bucket, although big numbers for sure. So this is just to begin our planning for how do we begin to establish a mindset of appropriate annual renewal. You'll notice there's no dollar amounts in there because you have to make it work within your budget. But we want to move from just the mindset of, okay, repairing at failure to we need to begin a intentional renewal plan. And that's what we're working toward in facilities now. That's more of a long-term project than it is there's not an immediate solution. So that's more for our planning, but wanted you to be aware of the mindset we're working toward with facilities moving forward. The other thing we thought appropriate to do is, since we're nearing the end of the current sales tax initiative, is we're nearing toward what is our fund balance in just the sales tax portion. And that is on line 109. So if you look at, we just completed the Lake Howell classroom addition portion of the sales tax initiative. That was a sales tax initiative project, but included was the auditorium, or the next phase. And so while we haven't totally identified all of the funding source for that next phase of the project, we know that right now our best estimate is we can allocate that portion of the sales tax revenue towards that project. So, but it does not appear as though that's going to come complete or come close to meeting the potential cost of that project. So don't want to suggest we're there yet, but we're certainly, it's on the radar as part of our long-term project completion. So I think those were the only primary changes to the capital budget document moving forward.
Reiterate a point. So that $10,439,600 is what we were projecting the sales tax fund balance to be at June 30, 2024. So going into 24-25, we can say we're fully exhausting all of the revenues that we've received from that initiative.
I
Vice Chair
just
Kraus?
was going to make the comment, Dr. Mullins, you were talking about the blank line items, the new roof replacement and the new HVAC. So I look at it as, instead of being reactive, we're going to be proactive, and I think that's easier to
Yes, 100%.
express to others.
And part of that proactive measure is working toward, repair at failure is 100% reactive, right? Preventative maintenance is proactive.
Right.
And so when we get to the place that we're on a renewal cycle, we then need to build in a preventative maintenance plan simultaneously, so we then get the full life out of that new equipment. So that's all
And can you
stated.
also share briefly with the board the amount of square footage that we're maintaining? You spelled that off the other day for me, and I was
Overall, I would love to hear that number.
Sure. It's over 12 million square feet
Whoa.
of capital
I know.
assets.
And that's just
the equivalent
buildings.
of about 5,000 residential homes.
and that's just the buildings, not the lands, not
Correct,
the
just
playgrounds,
buildings.
not the.
That's air-conditioned space,
That's like 5,000.
residential homes.
A lot to take care of.
Yeah.
So I think if you get me started on the operations conversation, I won't miss the opportunity to inform our community. We think that switching out an air conditioner at a school is, mindset is, even a 3,000 square foot home, you come in with a new air handler, you come in with a new compressor, and in a few hours, you got a brand new system and your house is cool. It's a better part of a year to switch out just the chiller plant at Winter Springs High School. And it requires mechanical engineering, cranes, and upwards of $5 million. So just to put it into perspective, and that's just the chiller plant, not the air handlers that are all throughout the buildings across the campus. So I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head how many air handlers we have at Winter Springs High School, but it's a lot, and they're as big as a
Bedroom?
yeah,
They're
a bedroom.
huge.
Yeah, well, maybe not that big. They're as big as a mid-size SUV. So
And then the parts take a while to come in. Everybody's looking for the same components that we're looking for. So we're all, using the same companies. And so it takes a while. Even how long ago did we order buses?
yeah, buses are a minimum of 10 months out.
Right. So and we haven't seen them yet. But it's not that you didn't order them. They've been ordered and everything's done. It's just that's how long everything's taking to come in.
Correct. The good news is what was about a 16 to 18 month out equipment delivery for HVAC. It's just under a year at this point. So we're still running 10 to 14 months, depending on the type of equipment. But at least it's not a year and a half like it was
I'll
not too
take
long
anything.
ago.
That's better. Yeah. Great.
Superintendent, I also think that part of this conversation should be part of the state of our schools. Just absolutely what we're taking care of. And
The hard part is going to try to get all this in there and get people to stay focused on it with like drawings and pictures and, keep the audience engaged because it's overwhelming.
Making notes.
thank you. Thank you.
I'll be more, between all the TO teachers and everything like that, we can come up with some creative ways to present it. Don? Dr. Cummings? Demetria? Amy? Heidi? All you, Mike? All right, anybody else with those questions?
No.
What else?
Dr. Mullins, are we ready to move on to our SR update? We're good on
Yes,
capital? Okay. Well, board members, you know that we are sunsetting on our ESSER funds in September of 2024. So thought it appropriate to do a little bit of a review of where we are from when we started in 2020 and the plan for sunsetting the funds here in September of 2024. So Ms. Minetto is here to kind of walk us through, and I will turn it over to you, Jamie.
Wonderful. Thank you and good afternoon. Before I get started, I do want to just acknowledge the shared nature of the responsibility for all of our COVID funding. As you all know, it has been quite a feat over the last 3 years. I will say that superintendent's cabinet members have served the primary role of getting this work done in their teams. The COVID funding really has touched pretty much every school and department in some way over the last several years. So definitely want to acknowledge that hard work. I am just the puppeteer of this work and am so blessed to have such great partners in this work. So just wanted to make that acknowledgement before I get started. First, as a reminder, the federal relief acts, there have been 3 since 2020. The COVID Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES, that was our first kind of round of funding, really focused on the immediate needs by schools and other governmental agencies as it relates to the response for COVID. Second, we saw the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, otherwise known as CRSA. That kind of started doing the borderline between transitioning from the immediate need relief into more learning loss mitigation as it related to the K-12 arena. And then the third round of funding and what appears to be the final is the American Rescue Plan, otherwise known as ARP. And that really, although we were still permitted to do some of that response, and there was still quite a bit of response still going on since some of this overlapped, really did focus quite a bit on learning loss mitigation. So we did see quite a bit of a transition into that type of work over the last couple of years with these funds. So to dig a little bit deeper, CARES, which the largest component of that was an act called ESSER. That component did close September 30 of 2022. Seminole County did submit the final financial report in November of that year. Did also want to point out that also under CARES, we did get quite a bit of categorical funding as well. All of those funds that came from CARES did close in fiscal year 22 as well. And I did provide for you some of those, just a snippet of some of what we received as far as categorical funding on the slide. So we did have some funds for reading and civics curriculum, data analysis support, quite a bit for summer programming, CTE program support, facility sanitation, and the instructional continuity plan development. So again, thinking about how, CARES really was focused on that immediate response need. ESSER 2, which was under CRSA, did just close in September of 2023, so just this past fall. We did submit our final financial report in November. We did have several categorical funding that came under CRSA as well that really primarily focused on district-wide summer programs, which you all got to experience last summer. Pretty extensive work being done in all of our schools. We also did receive funding for supplemental civics materials and CTE dual enrollment support. And then finally, the ARP funding, ESSER 3, will be closing in about 5.5 months, September 30th of this year. Currently, we are at about 72% expended with several planned activities for the duration of the spring going into the summer, with all planned activities to be concluded by the end of July, beginning of August, with our BEST 3.0 really being one of the very last projects that we'll be doing with our ESSER 3 funding. We do also have quite a few other ARP, or those categorical funds that came from underneath the ARP Act. Those have been in the areas of summer student academic programs, after school, school break and weekend academies, math and STEM resources, instructional resources, programs with students with disabilities, as well as programs for students experiencing homelessness. I will note that the programs for students with disabilities actually came under an ARP IDEA grant, and that grant did close in September of 2023 as well. That was one of the only ARP grants that actually had an early close date. So we are on target with all of our activities moving forward and towards closure as we conclude out this grant in September of 2024.
Anybody have any questions? First of all, thank you very much. The ESSER, I know it takes a village, and appreciate you all and your teams. You guys are amazing, and I know it trickles down, domino effect, down to our assistant superintendents, into the schools, principals, and then, allocating and different things like that. I commend you all for everything that you all are doing. And with the ESSER dollars, the programs that have been implemented and what you all have done, I've heard nothing but raving reviews. everybody wants to teach summer school, not because of the money, but because of what they're doing and making a difference, but also having the joy of the learning part aspect in it. And they really, really like it. So kudos to you and your team as well.
It's going to be sad not to have those next summer.
We're going to win that big lottery ticket, and I'm going to give it all to y'all.
Really, thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for your humility. I know that you've coordinated the vast majority of all of this, so I appreciate you working so well, so collaboratively with all of the different cabinet members. And it's been exciting to see how far-reaching these projects have extended. I know in talking to many of our other districts at FSBA and through the Central Florida School Boards Coalition, that we certainly were very creative and really elevated our student success because of the strategic way that the money was spent and the programs were enacted. So thank you.
Other questions? Definitely are light years ahead of them, that's for sure. Superintendent?
Well, Chair, those are all of the updates. Obviously, we will continue to have discussions about the budget when we come to you all, I believe in June, on next steps. But as far as the overview of where we are right now and where we will be as of September 24 as it relates to ESSER, that is the information that we've presented today. So unless there are any other questions, then
we're going to go ahead and adjourn, but please thank your teams, all of your all's teams, everybody that's here, because clearly we know it's not just the people that are presenting. We know how much work you all do, and we want you to make sure you let everybody else know how much we appreciate them. And because we know that everybody working together and collaborating is the way and the reason why Seminole County is number one.
And we'll send coffee July 17th-ish through July 19th. We'll deliver coffee for you.
Yes.
Or Red Bulls, whatever it is that you...
And Chair, if...
I'm going to go ahead and...
Once you adjourn, we do have 15 minutes then upstairs for a birthday celebration.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and adjourn. It's 3:02. And see you all back at 5:30. We're going to go upstairs and celebrate birthdays.